I was standing in a hospice hallway, paper cup of cold coffee in my hand. The door to my father's room was open just 4 inches. And through that gap, I heard my stepmother lean over his bed and whisper something to a dying man that I will never, for the rest of my life, unhear. Just sign. She'll fight you forever over nothing. A pause. Then the part that changed everything. I'm the one who stayed. My father had 68 hours left to live. He could barely lift his hand off the blanket. And somewhere above his bed, a small camera blinked one steady red light. I did not shout. I did not drop the coffee. I did not move. I just stood there in that quiet hallway and I listened. Because I had spent 10 years of my career learning exactly what that moment was. And what happened next cost my stepmother $2.7 million. But before you cheer, you need to hear the whole story. Because the real hero of this story is not me. It is a nurse who wrote a stranger's phone number on the back of her hand. And a father who mailed a folder before he forgot my name. Stay with me. If stories like this one matter to you, hit subscribe right now and leave a like before we go any further. It genuinely helps more than you will ever know. Now let's go back to where this really started. My name is Frances Wheeler. I am 34 years old. I work as a paralegal at an estate and probate litigation firm in Denver, Colorado. My entire career is built around one thing: watching families fall apart over money after someone dies. I draft the petitions. I organize the exhibits. I hand the right document to the right lawyer at exactly the right moment. I am good at it. I am also invisible at it. And for a long time, that suited me perfectly. My old boss called me steady. My father called me Franny. And he always meant it like a compliment. My father's name was Raymond Wheeler. He was the kind of man who built things with his hands and trusted people with a handshake. He started with one truck and a stack of drywall in 1978. By the time he turned 60, he owned a building supply company that served half the contractors in the county. He sold it for a fair price, paid off the house, and put the rest somewhere safe. He never bragged about the number. He just said he was comfortable. Ray was not a warm man the way television fathers are warm. He showed love by fixing your brakes and refusing to take your gas money. He showed worry by going quiet and rubbing the back of his neck. When my mother died and I was 19 years old, my father and I learned how to be a very small and very careful family of 2. He had a saying. He used it about tools and money and people he trusted. I put things where they belong, Franny. The summer before he got sick, he said it again on the phone. Out of nowhere, he told me he had been organizing his paperwork. He said there was a folder with my name on it. That he had put it where it belonged. I was driving when he said it. I said, "Sure, Dad, sounds good." And I changed the subject to his garden. I have replayed that phone call more times than I can count. I did not ask what folder. I did not ask where. I was busy and certain there would be time for folders later. That folder is going to matter more than almost anything else in this story. But I would not understand that for another year. Long after the man who labeled it could no longer tell me where it was. Now let me tell you about Diane. She came into our lives 8 years before the hospice hallway. She was a dental office manager. 50 years old. Divorced. Organized in a way my father genuinely admired. She kept his calendar. She labeled the spice rack. She made the house run on time. And after years of my father eating cereal for dinner alone, that felt like a real kindness. I want to be fair to her. Because this story does not work if I lie to you. Diane was not lazy. When my father's diagnosis came, she did not run. She drove him to chemotherapy at 6 in the morning. She sat through the worst nights. The ones with the bucket and the cold sweats and the medications that had to be given at exact hours. She learned every drug name. She learned every schedule. For about a year, she was exactly what a sick man needs. I told myself that was enough. I told myself I could be the daughter who called on Sundays because Diane was the wife who showed up every day. But somewhere in those 8 years, something had quietly shifted inside her. A belief had taken root. Hard and small and growing. She believed that staying was the same as earning. She believed that every hospital chair and every bad night had a price tag, and that the bill would come due from my father's estate. She had a son named Garrett. 36 years old. He believed it even harder than she did. And I could not see any of that from 1,000 miles away. The illness took 14 months. The last 3 weeks were hospice. For the first year I could still reach my father easily. I would call on Sundays and he would pick up and we would talk about nothing for 20 minutes. That was our language. Nothing spoken comfortably between two people who loved each other without knowing how to say it out loud. Then the calls started going to voicemail. When I did get through, Diane was usually on the line within a minute. "He's tired, Francis," she would say. "He needs to rest. Don't get him worked up." It sounded reasonable. That is the terrifying thing about isolation. It always arrives dressed as protection. I would text my father and Diane would answer from his phone. I would say I was coming to visit and the dates would never quite work. There was always a procedure. A bad week. A doctor who said no visitors. I let it happen. I want to be honest about that. I was busy. I was guilty. And it was easier to believe the woman in the house than to fight her from Denver. By the time my father entered hospice, I had not had a real conversation with him in almost 2 months. I did not know how thin he had gotten. I did not know he had stopped reading. I found out later that Diane had told the hospice staff she was his only contact. She was not. I was listed too. Second. In my father's own handwriting. Somebody just never called the second number. Until somebody did. Her name was Carol Bishop. She had been a hospice nurse for 19 years. She told me later that you learn to read a room the way a sailor reads a sky. You stop looking at the words people use and you start watching what they do with their hands and their eyes. What Carol read in my father's room made her uneasy for weeks. She noticed that visitors were managed. Old friends would arrive and Diane would meet them at the door and they would leave without ever going in. She noticed that the phone by the bed had been moved out of my father's reach onto the windowsill. She noticed the papers. A folder on the side table that had nothing to do with medicine. Forms with little colored tabs that said "sign here." She watched Diane slide them closer to my father and she watched him turn his face away. She noticed Garrett too. He came in the evenings and talked low with his mother in the hallway and he never once reached out to hold my father's hand. One afternoon she heard Diane say through the half-open door, "Ray, we just need this done before anything happens." And she heard my father say one word. "Franny." Just my name. Like a question. Like a man reaching for something he could not find. That night Carol checked the chart. She found a second emergency contact. Written in a shaky old man's hand. A Denver area code. She did not say a word to Diane. She wrote the number on the back of her own hand in ballpoint pen. She carried it home. And 2 days later, she used it. The call came on a Tuesday at 9 at night. "Is this Frances Wheeler? Raymond Wheeler's daughter?" "Yes. My name is Carol. I'm a nurse at your father's hospice. I don't think anyone has been calling you." I sat down on my kitchen floor before I realized I was doing it. "How bad?" I said. "Days," she said gently. "Maybe less." Then her voice shifted. Careful and deliberate. "Francis, there are papers here. Your stepmother is asking him to sign things. I don't think he understands them." The kitchen went completely silent. "He keeps saying your name," Carol said. "I do not remember packing. I remember the highway at night, dark and endless, my hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, the dashboard clock counting hours I could not get back. I drove 14 hours straight. I stopped once for gas and a coffee I did not drink. The whole way my paralegal brain ran its checklist, cold and clear underneath the panic. Confidential relationship. Sudden change. Diminished capacity. Pressure to sign. Every single red flag my career had trained me to recognize. My own father was checking them one at a time 1,000 miles ahead of me. I pulled into the hospice parking lot just after 11 at night. I bought a cup of coffee in the lobby because my hands needed something to hold. Then I walked down a pale hallway toward a door that stood open 4 inches. And I heard her voice. "Just sign. She'll fight you forever over nothing." My hand stopped on the door. I'm the one who stayed. I have spent 10 years watching people in the worst moments of their lives. And I have learned one thing above everything else. When something terrible is happening in front of you, the loudest reaction is almost never the strongest one. So I did not push the door open and scream. I did not throw the coffee. I stood in that hallway and I breathed, 1, 2, 3. And I listened to a woman I had trusted with my father's life try to talk a dying man out of his own. Then I looked up at the small red light of the camera blinking steadily in the corner above his bed. The camera my father and Diane had installed months ago so she could check on him from the kitchen. Nobody had ever turned it off. I pushed the door open. Diane straightened up fast. "Francis, you came." She tried to make it sound like welcome. It came out like an accusation. I crossed to the other side of the bed and took my father's hand. His skin was paper. His eyes found mine and stayed. "Hi, Dad. It's Franny. I'm here." On the bedside table sat a folder with colored tabs. "Sign here. Sign here." And next to it a pen. Uncapped. "Ready. He wants to get his affairs in order." Diane smoothed a blanket that did not need smoothing. We were just finishing up. At 11 at night. On a morphine drip. "Dad," I said quietly, "do you want to sign anything tonight?" His hand tightened on mine. "Barely. But I felt it." "Franny." "Not yes. Not no. Just my name." Like a man holding on to a railing in the dark. Diane's voice climbed. "He knows what he's doing. He told me he wants to take care of me. Then it can wait until morning." I capped the pen and moved it out of her reach. "When his own lawyer is here." That word landed. His own. I watched it hit her face. For just 1 second Diane was not the face of a grieving wife. She was the face of someone doing math and not liking the answer. The nurse stepped in quietly behind me and said it was time for Mr. Wheeler to rest. The pen stayed on the table. Nobody signed anything that night. After Diane went home, I pulled the vinyl chair close to the bed and held my father's hand in the dark. The 4-pump ticked. The little red light blinked. Somewhere down the hall a television murmured. Around 2 in the morning, my father surfaced. It happens sometimes near the end. A clear window opens. Brief and bright. And then it closes forever. His voice was a thread. But his eyes were completely his own. "Franny, you drove?" 14 hours, I said. "You owe me gas money." He almost laughed. It turned into a cough. "Dad, is there anything I need to know? Anything about your papers?" He was quiet for a long moment. His hand moved on the blanket like he was reaching for a tool that was not there. "The folder." His fingers closed on the air. "I put it where it belongs." "What folder, Dad? Where?" His eyes were already losing the light. The window was closing. "You'll find it." A long breath. Then the ghost of his old quiet grin. "Smart girl. Smartest thing I ever made." Those were the last clear words my father ever said to me. Not a location. Not a number. Just faith. Handed to me in the dark. That I would find what he had hidden and understand what to do with it. He died 68 hours later on a Friday just before dawn. I held his hand until it went cool. Then I went out to the hallway and sat on the floor with my back against the wall, and I did not know yet that the folder he had mailed me was sitting in my own storage unit in Denver for over a year, waiting for me to be ready to look. 4 days after the funeral, Diane sat me down at the dining table and slid a document across to me. Garrett stood by the window with his arms crossed like a man guarding a door. "It's a family settlement agreement," Diane said. "It just makes everything simple." It was short, which told me a great deal. It said I waived any claim to my father's estate. I agreed not to contest any transfers. In exchange, Diane would generously give me $20,000 and my mother's old jewelry box. $20,000. Out of $2.7 million. "Your father wanted peace, Francis. He hated fighting. Sign this and we can all grieve together." There it was again. Sign. Peace. The same melody with new words. I looked at the uncapped pen sitting on top of the agreement like an invitation. I thought of my father turning his face away from a different pen. "I'm not going to sign this today," I said. Diane's smile thinned. I stood and gathered my coat. "I'll be in touch." Behind me I heard Garrett mutter to his mother. "She knows. I told you she'd know." That sentence told me one thing clearly. They were afraid. I did not slam the door. I did not deliver a speech. I just walked to my car and let myself shake for exactly 5 minutes. Then I stopped. And I went to work. I found the folder on a Sunday afternoon. Completely by accident. I had torn apart my apartment for a week. Closets. Drawers. File boxes. Nothing. Then I remembered the storage unit I had rented when I first moved to Denver. 4 years ago. Paid every month. Never once visited. I drove over on a gray afternoon and rolled up the metal door. Inside were the boxes from my move. And sitting on top of one of them, a flat-rate mailing box. Postmarked from Ohio. Dated 13 months earlier. I remembered it the way you remember a dream. It had arrived during a brutal week at work. My father had called to say something was on its way. I had shoved it in the storage unit meaning to deal with it later. Later had taken 13 months and a funeral. I sat down on the cold concrete floor and opened it. Inside was a manila folder. On the front, in my father's blocky careful capital letters, one word. Franny. My hands were not steady. Inside the folder was a business card for an attorney named Helen Avery in Columbus. And behind it, a thick stapled document with a blue cover. A revocable living trust. Dated 13 months earlier. Signed by my father when he was still completely sharp. Witnessed. Notarized. Executed properly in a lawyer's office. The trust held the house. It held the brokerage accounts. It held nearly everything. And it named one person as the successor trustee. The person who would control all of it when he was gone. Me. My father had quietly and carefully put everything where it belonged over a year before he died. He just never got the chance to tell me where the map was. I put things where they belong, Franny. He had. He really had. I drove back to Ohio that week and sat across from Helen Avery at a polished table. She explained it the way I would have explained it to a client. But it landed completely differently when it was my own family. The trust controls the major assets, she said. Not the will. Not the power of attorney. A trust supersedes them all. She tapped the blue cover. Your father moved the house and the accounts into this trust 13 months ago. By the time he got sick, he did not personally own most of what Diane was moving around. I felt the ground steady under me for the first time in weeks. So the transfers were made from trust assets, using a power of attorney, by someone who is not the trustee. Helen folded her hands. That is not just questionable, Francis. That is self-dealing by an agent. It is actionable. And the deed she wanted him to sign at the hospice? He could not deed away what the trust already held. Even if he had signed it. Even if he had been completely clear-headed. Which the medical records confirm he absolutely was not. Diane and Garrett had spent 6 months and a deathbed whisper trying to steal a house that my father had already protected. They had been so focused on the will, they never once thought to ask whether there was a trust. We filed 2 petitions in probate court. One to confirm the trust and my role as trustee. One to recover the transferred assets and set aside the deed on the grounds of self-dealing and undue influence. I want to be honest about how I felt writing those petitions. Part of me wanted to make it hurt. To put every single ugly detail in the filing. To call Diane exactly what she was. I did not do that. I had watched for 10 years what happens to people who let anger write their legal documents. They overreach. They look vindictive. They hand the other side free sympathy. So I wrote it cold. Clean. Dates and dollar amounts and the timeline. The timeline did the screaming so I did not have to. The hearing was on a Tuesday in March. I had sat in courtrooms like this one 100 times for work. I had never once sat at the table myself. Helen was beside me. Across the aisle were Diane and Garrett and their lawyer. A tired-looking man who had clearly read the file and clearly wished he had not. In the gallery, my Aunt Loretta sat in the second row on my side. She gave me a small nod. 3 things sat on the table in front of me. The trust with its blue cover. The medical chart. And a folder of bank statements with little colored tabs. The same kind of tabs Diane had used on her deed. I had chosen those tabs on purpose. Carol testified first. 19 years as a hospice nurse. Calm and precise. She described the managed visitors. The phone moved out of reach. The papers with the sign here tabs. The low voices in the hallway late at night. I know the difference between a family grieving and a family working, she said simply. Diane's lawyer asked if she was certain she had heard correctly through a closed door. The door was open, Carol said. About 4 inches. And she was not quiet about it. What did you hear? Carol looked at the judge. Not at me. Not at Diane. I heard Mrs. Wheeler tell her dying husband to just sign. I heard her say his daughter would fight forever over nothing. She paused. And I heard her say, I'm the one who stayed. The words fell into that quiet courtroom like stones dropped into still water. Then Helen laid out the rest. One piece at a time. In a voice as flat as a ledger. The trust signed 13 months before death. Witnessed. Notarized. The assets it held. The transfers made against those assets by someone with no authority over them. The medical chart showing morphine and confusion and a nurse's note that read, patient appears distressed during financial discussions. Then she said the words that changed the direction of the entire room. Mrs. Wheeler was the decedent's wife, caregiver, and power of attorney all at once. She benefited directly from transfers made while he was incapacitated. Under the law, that raises a presumption of undue influence. The burden is now hers to prove she did nothing wrong. The tired lawyer across the aisle had almost nothing left to offer. And that is when Diane broke. She stood up before her lawyer could stop her. Her face was flushed. Her voice was climbing toward the ceiling and stripping away every layer of performance as it went. I gave him everything. Do you understand that? I held the bucket. I cleaned him. I sat there every single night while she stabbed a finger toward me across the aisle, while she was off in Denver living her life. Mrs. Wheeler. The judge's voice was quiet. I'm the one who stayed. Diane's voice cracked wide open now. I stayed. The courtroom went completely silent. I did not stand. I did not raise my voice. I did not react at all. I sat with my hands folded on the table and I let her be the loudest person in the room. Because in a courtroom, the loudest person is almost never the one who wins. The judge looked at Diane for a long steady moment over her reading glasses. Sit down, Mrs. Wheeler. Her voice was quiet. And it carried further than any shout. Staying with a man is not the same as owning him. When it was my turn I kept it short. I looked at Diane not with hatred but plainly. The way you look at weather. You did stay with him, I said. That was real. And I am grateful for it. He wanted you cared for and his trust does exactly that. She blinked. She had braced herself for an attack. She did not know what to do with the truth. But you stayed with him. You never signed with him. I let that sit in the open air for a moment. He put things where they belonged a year before any of this started. He just trusted me to find them. I turned to face the judge. So that is all I am asking the court to do. Put things back where he put them. Then I sat down. The judge did not need long. She found that the trust controlled the major assets. She found the deed invalid. She found the transfers to be self-dealing and ordered them fully reversed and surcharged. When the accountants finished the math, the number that moved back to my father's trust away from Diane and Garrett was $2.7 million. Returned in full. To exactly where my father had wanted it. I did not cheer. I just looked down at the blue cover of the trust on the table in front of me. And I thought one sentence very clearly. I found it, Dad. I found where it belonged. The fallout came fast and quiet. The way real consequences usually do. No fireworks. Just doors closing one at a time. Garrett was ordered to repay every dollar traced to his accounts. The restaurant debts were still waiting. The life raft he had reached for was gone. Philip Marsh, the lawyer who had drafted the deed for a man on a morphine drip without ever meeting him in person, received a formal note from the judge in the record. That note found its way to the state bar. A review was opened. A man who builds his practice on cases other lawyers refuse cannot afford a review. Diane sat through all of it in silence. The fire had gone out of her completely in that courtroom and what was left underneath looked a great deal like exhaustion. The performance was over. There was no audience left. My Aunt Loretta found me in the hallway afterward. She held on tight and said, "Your daddy would be proud. Not of the money. Of how you did it." I held on to those words. Because I had not won the way the angry part of me had once wanted to win. I had not destroyed anyone. I had not screamed. I had simply and patiently put a careful man's wishes back into their place. Now here is the part people always ask me about. Why did I not take everything? The answer is simple. My father had not left Diane with nothing. His trust gave her a real bequest. The right to live in the house for the rest of her life. He had chosen that while he was completely clear-headed, and I honored every single word of it. Taking more than that would have made me the thing she accused me of being. A person who treats a family like an estate sale. So Diane kept what my father actually gave her. And not $1 more. We are not friends. We will never be friends. But she has what he wanted her to have. The $2.7 million went back into the trust and then exactly where my father's instructions sent it. Some to me. Some to a scholarship at the trade school where he learned to read a blueprint at 17 years old. He had set that up too. Quietly. The way he did everything. I think about that scholarship more than I think about my own share. Somewhere every year a kid with calloused hands and grease under their nails gets a little help from a careful man who put things where they belonged, long before anyone thought to ask. Carol and I send each other a card every year on the anniversary of the night she dialed a number written on the back of her hand. My Aunt Loretta and I talk every single Sunday now. We talk about nothing comfortably the way I used to talk to my dad. It is not the same. But it is something. And I never let the line go quiet anymore. A few weeks after it was all over I sat at my own kitchen table in Denver with a fresh cup of coffee. Not cold lobby coffee in a paper cup in a hospice hallway. Real coffee. In my own mug. Still warm. I drank the whole thing. It was the first time in a very long time I had let myself sit completely still without a chart in front of me. If there is one thing I want you to carry away from this story, it is not the legal strategy. It is not the courtroom moment. It is this. Staying is not the same as being owed. And the people who love you quietly will trust you to find what they left behind, long after they can no longer point you toward it. Call the person you have been meaning to call. Do not assume there is time for folders later. Because the most important thing my father ever gave me was not in that trust document. It was in the 4 words he said in the dark at 2 in the morning with his eyes almost completely gone. Smart girl. Find it. He trusted me to finish what he started. And that is the only inheritance that truly mattered. That is my story. One nurse who noticed. One folder mailed before the forgetting started. And a father who put things where they belonged and trusted his daughter to find them. If this story reminded you to check a healthcare directive or call someone being kept too quiet, please do it today. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me what part stayed with you longest. Subscribe so you are here for the next one. And thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for watching all the way to the end.